what do you know about Berlin, the capital of Germany? Well, it's a city that is known for its beautiful architecture and the arts. It's almost like one big museum. But there's something much more significant to me and my people about Berlin, because it was right here, just a few meters away, that the fate of Africa was decided about 140 years ago, between 1884 and 1885. This building housed leaders from 14 nations who came together to make some very important decisions about Africa. But guess what? There was no African representative at that meeting. But what did they do? Well, some say what they did was basically sharing African territory amongst themselves. But others say, no, that's not what they did. They just maybe set the terms and conditions for trade and shipping on the Congo and Niger River. And they even added that they also tried to find a way to ensure that the areas and territories are shared in such a way that there will not be conflict. Potato, potato. But the point is, my continent's future was shaped from that moment. The course was changed. Is it for good or for bad? Well, I think the evidence is out there. But as I stand at this place, I wonder, will Africa ever get back on course? Will there be some form of restitution? While we keep working towards that, Africa must get its act together and be its own restitution.
They told us Africa was dark, primitive, and waiting to be civilized. That was a lie. Before the Europeans ever held their infamous Berlin Conference, Africa was already rich in more ways than one. We're talking about massive kingdoms like the Mali Empire, which had universities and trade routes that stretched across the desert. The Ashanti Empire, rich in gold and diplomacy. The sophisticated structures of Great Zimbabwe. Ethiopia, one of the world's oldest continuous civilizations. There were city-states, organized governance, legal systems, languages, diplomacy, and long-distance trade routes that connected Africa with the Middle East, India, and beyond. But Europe didn't see that, or better said, they ignored it. What they saw was opportunity. Raw materials, open markets, cheap labor, and most importantly, a chance to dominate. They used racist ideologies to frame Africa as uncivilized to justify what they were about to do. The real goal, profit. The real method, conquest. The real weapon, division. This wasn't about civilization. It was about colonization wrapped in lies.
Of European delegates met up to speak about Africa in Berlin, with no Africans present in the room. Matter of fact, only 2 of these men had ever been on the African continent, but that didn't matter. For the next 100-some days, Africa would be partitioned and handed out like a piece of pie amongst 13 European nations and the US. But why exactly did all of this happen? Well, to answer that, I've got to tell you about the 1884 Berlin Conference, or what the Lagos Observer called at the time the world's biggest robbery. The road to Berlin was really the culmination of a bunch of things that, all had to do with European interference on the African continent. See, while European exploration of the African continent began in the 15th century, it was very limited, and it stayed limited well into the 17th and 18th centuries. But the discovery of precious minerals in African soil only ramped up outside interest. Different European countries started vying over control of the interior of Africa, and this led to territorial disputes. And thus the idea of a summit that could promote cooperation and mutual trade for the benefit of all colonial powers won approval. So in 1884, on a cold Saturday afternoon, US and European representatives partitioned Africa along colonial lines with no regard to existing cultural borders. The Berlin Conference, also known as the West Africa Conference or the Congo Conference, effectively formalized the Scramble for Africa and regulated colonial activity.
The Berlin Conference, hosted by German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, ran from November 1884 to February 1885. Its purpose: to divide up the African continent among European powers without going to war with each other. 14 nations, 12 were European. The US showed up as a guest. 0 African nations were present. It was here that they drew borders on maps, slicing through ethnic groups, kingdoms, and communities as if they were drawing up property lines. They created artificial nations, often grouping together people who had deep historical rivalries, or separating those who had always been united. No local consultation, no consent, no recognition of African humanity. They agreed to rules for effective occupation, meaning if a European nation could control a piece of land, they could claim it. It wasn't just diplomatic, it was the legal groundwork for brutal colonization. The entire African continent, with only 2 exceptions, Liberia and Ethiopia, was carved up and handed out like a birthday cake. This was not cooperation, it was organized theft.
If we look from 1885 to 1908, we're talking about personal rule, enslavement. From 1908 to 1960, colonialism, Congo under colonial rule. Congo finally elects its leader in 1960, and in 61 was assassinated. So we have assassination. Then a dictator was put over the people for another 3 decades. So now we have dictatorship. Then an invasion was backed from outside with Rwanda and Uganda in 1996 that Congolese people suffer from to this day. So we have 125 years of this. Now what that does is it destroys and eviscerates the Congolese institutions.
You can't break something and then blame it for not working. The results of the Berlin Conference weren't just political. They were catastrophic, and the effects are still felt today. Here's what followed. 1. Forced labor and genocide. Belgium's King Leopold II turned the Congo into his personal slave camp. Millions were mutilated, tortured, and killed in the name of rubber profits.
So if you're going to ask about who was one of the most genocidal leaders in history, you'd say Hitler, right? Pol Pot. Did any of you guess King Leopold II of Belgium? Maybe. Maybe not. Because we are only taught U.S. imperial history in schools, we here at Buzzsaw think it'd be a good idea to keep you informed of historical events and figures that may have been overlooked, censored, and forgotten in the whitewashing of our history. So today we bring you the story of King Leopold II of Belgium. Now, King Leopold owned the Congo during his reign as the constitutional monarch of Belgium in the late 1800s. While owning the Congo, King Leopold was responsible for the deaths of over 10 million Congolese. Let me repeat that number one more time so you fully understand it. 10 million.
2. Resource theft. Gold, diamonds, ivory, all timber, all stolen. Europe grew rich, while Africa bled. 3. Broken borders. Artificial borders sowed the seeds of future ethnic conflict, civil wars, and territorial disputes that still destabilize African nations today. 4. Cultural erasure. European languages were imposed. Indigenous religions attacked. Entire histories were rewritten or ignored. 5. Extractive institutions. Colonial governments didn't build for Africans. They built for extraction. Roads and railways were made to move goods out, not help people thrive. And when African nations gained independence in the mid-20th century, they inherited countries built to serve Europe, not their own people. Many of today's issues, corruption, conflict, underdevelopment, stem not from African failure, but from colonial sabotage. The story we're told is that Europe brought light to a dark continent. The truth, Europe brought a storm. The scramble for Africa wasn't just historical violence, it was a system of domination that reshaped the world. And to this day, the world is living with its aftermath, borders that still don't make sense. Economies still tied to former colonial powers. Military bases, foreign corporations, and debt traps that echo the past in new clothing. The Berlin Conference was the launchpad. It was colonialism with a suit and tie, cloaked in diplomacy but soaked in greed. And if we don't talk about it, expose it, and teach it, history repeats. This is why the story must be told, loudly, truthfully, unfiltered, because the pain isn't just in the past. It's in the present, and only the truth can bring healing, resistance, and reconstruction. Africa was never a void, it was never for sale, it was stolen. And it's time we stopped pretending otherwise. If this moved you, hit the comments, speak your mind. Share this with someone who still believes the myths, because truth, not silence, is power.